even it doesn't matter whether it's reality. The point was, if that's how our customers perceive us, if that's how they believe that we've been with them, that is the truth. That's the reality, and that's what we've got to work on until we get a different response from them.
Hello and welcome back to Wotter Future. This week we're joined by Ian Filby. Ian was the CEO of DFS for 9 years and since then has gone on to be chairman of Shoezone, Joules and Pendragon, the car retailing group. He's also on the board of the British Retail Consortium. He's a trustee for a fintech charity called Pennies, and he's a chair of the startup Her Spirit. Ian, I'm so grateful to have you with us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
No, thanks a lot, Fraser. It's always a privilege to be able to talk to new people, part of the lifeblood of the way I look at the world. So really looking forward to our conversation today.
Brilliant. Likewise. Well, let's jump straight in then with the question. Everyone knows it by now. What is the biggest issue affecting the world of work right now?
Wouldn't it be good if I could just give you the one sentence answer that captured that? And I'm sure everybody's got lots of different nuances around it. But the way I would always look at this is, and it's such a cliche, and I'm not sure everybody really gets to the bottom of it, but people are your, by far, most important asset. And therefore, in a world where clearly there is pressure on the workforce coming in, there is pressure on retaining youngsters who, in more recent years, are very keen to hop around from business to business. They're not tied into future final salary pension schemes. They don't see the need to build a career just through one company. They also want to get a life-work balance. They know they're going to be working probably till they're 70. So that aspect's got harder. How easy is it to bring typically women back into the workplace post having family? So we've kind of got a number of dimensions, and then not to obviously miss the fact that the world's just got more complicated. All businesses' customers are much more knowledgeable about you, what your customers think about you, and what the alternatives would be because of the digital revolution. So I think there's a huge perfect storm. So going back to, what's the toughest call is, how do I get the best people or the right people for my business, and how do I retain them? You might say, well, that's two questions, but I'd wrap it up as one huge issue. So I think we can have a really good conversation, around that. And one of the first places I would kind of start is, do you really know what the different groups of people that might be working for you actually feel about working for your business? And are they even clear themselves what they would like to get out of working for your business, so that you have a higher chance of attracting them and retaining them?
Really interesting. I think there's a couple of things to sort of unpack in there. And I think if we go, one of the first things that caught my ear there was you mentioned about finding the best people, but then you changed that to finding the right people.
Yeah.
I think this is really interesting, isn't it? Like there isn't a sort of set culture. There isn't these people fit into this like absolute paragon level of people, and these are the people you need, and it's no one else. What it is actually saying, okay, well, people who have these sorts of tendencies, these ways of working, etc., these are part of my culture, or those people should be part of that culture, or maybe I should adapt my culture in order to attract more people like this. This is a fluid thing. And how do you go about sort of defining that, through your experience at, DFS, for example? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge, important part of our success, and we did have a success story over my nine years there, and it was rooted in changing the culture. So getting a shared view of where we were going. Again, very cliched thing, but it, when you talk about where you're going, you need to have a granular description of that people feel that they have partly co-created and therefore believe in the purpose of the organization, all these kind of words that get bandied around, but really important if you get under the skin of it. And then every 6 months, we used to do a colleague engagement survey, something that we introduced into the business very early doors, so that people could give us some real detailed feedback about what they felt we were doing, where we were, how we were doing it, and how it related to their aspirations and ambitions. So you could start getting different groups of people by age, by socio-demographic, by function in the organization, and start to get to see whether the organization was pulling together. So measuring it, getting a granular understanding whether everybody understood where the business was going, and then beginning to align the business was just like a huge element. And it's the old sort of triangle of, we were great believers that if our colleagues were engaged, they would look after our customers better. And then we did absolutely more net promoter score work with our customers than I'm aware of any other organization I've ever come across. Literally tracking how our customers felt about us on 5 stages of the sofa buying and owning journey, and then fed that back into remuneration and results. So that triangle just kept working the business up. We got happier colleagues, we got happier customers, and luckily we got better results coming out of that, which was how the success story worked. But I did say right people rather than best people, because in there's lots of analogies into sport here. But in the end, I'm afraid being very boring and a bit blokey, although thankfully these days football's become a huge game in ladies.
We're allowed to talk about it.
Yes, we can talk about it with at least many of them analogy, but without going into too many details there. But it's the case of, you can't have 11 strikers on the pitch. You can't have 11 Erling Haalands on the pitch anymore. You've got to have all the blend. So when I say the right people rather than the best people, I mean people who help create great teams so that people support, therefore they buy into the culture. As individuals, they're more likely to be people who are radiators in their personality rather than drainers. So they lift the spirit of the organization. People who are curious, people who are up for adapting how they work, because the workplace is, just as we described at the start, in this digital age, every year that your work is likely to need to be a bit different because the stimulus had changed. So those are some of the things that were hugely important to us, and I would encourage everybody to go into that sort of micro understanding of who your colleagues are and how they can help the sort of mission of the organisation.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, you mentioned there the idea of having that sort of vision. You said it was potentially a little cliche, but I think I've certainly spoken to a lot of people. I'm sure you have as well. That this vision is either not clearly defined at that top level.
Yeah.
The leadership team actually haven't sat and done the work. They may have an idea in their head, of course, but they've never sort of defined it. Or the second thing is that somewhere the communication's broken down and the person on the ground floor has no idea what that vision is, even if it is written on a wall over in head office somewhere. And I think that's quite interesting, because as humans, we like to belong, and we like to be part of a cause. And if we don't know what that cause is, it's very difficult to emotionally sort of attach yourself to it, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, and like a lot of things in life, it has to be authentic. So I think many organizations have all those things, and it is written on the wall, and people just don't really know what it means. So one of the really important aspects of us is we wanted to become a world-class business. We were a competitive selling organization, so the organization related to that, and they got excited about that, and then they wanted to actually have conversations with us as the executive team about what does that mean, and therefore you could have a really engaged conversation about what world class is. And part of our philosophy in the organization is, well, you never arrive at world class. World class is a mindset that is kind of always looking for marginal improvement. So we ended up at one point fantastic. Well, it's, I think, as far as I'm aware, still are for the last 8-10 years. We've been supporting Team GB in the Olympics, and so we got so much great input from athletes and coaches who then came and talked to our organisation about marginal improvement, and which has all been part of the great British success story. So linking up with the Olympics then became a marketing initiative, but that completely resonated with the organisation because it's how they felt they were in their business.
I think that's really interesting. And as you say, there's a sort of authenticity there. I mean, I think probably one takeaway, I certainly feel this kind of idea you say of world class not being something that you achieve. It's a mindset that you use within yourself. This is something that we can all do on all levels of our lives. I think.
Yeah.
Go and say, okay, well, this thing over here, how can I do it better? And it's not about sort of beating yourself up and saying, "Oh, well, I'm rubbish at that thing." It's about saying, "Okay, well, I'm aware that nothing I do is perfect. How do I get on?" I think that's having a culture there. We've spoken on this podcast before with other people about the culture being the thing that guides people's sort of method of working in this way.
Yeah.
And if they can see the business doing this and working for this constant improvement, by necessity, if you're working for improvement, you have to admit that what you did before wasn't perfect, and that's a really powerful culture to have going through. And there's plenty of evidence to suggest that DFS was not the only company that has successfully, seen benefits from this.
Correct.
But it sounds like with your partnerships there, you were certainly at the pinnacle. That's really interesting. And so I suppose this is probably something you've taken forward into your other roles.
much harder to do it in I think you have to be very conscious as chairman that you're there to be a sounding board, a guide to the strategy of the organization, but in the end a supporter of the CEO. So it's the CEO's role in life to create the strategy and the culture. What you can do is bring, hopefully, wisdom is probably too big a word, but the benefits of the experiences over 30-40 years in retail with some great brands like DFS, Boots that I was in for many years before, and therefore you can share, but you've got to be very careful as a chairman that you don't try and impose your way of doing things or your experiences on an organisation. But yeah, I'd like to think that I can at least share some of the successes that I enjoyed in particularly in those two great companies in Boots and DFS.
Fantastic. So going back to the sort of initial sort of problem statement about people being the big thing and not necessarily understanding those sorts of differences in demographic and those groups, but needing ultimately those people to be rowing with you. Can you think of a sort of particular moment where that really kind of crystallized for you, that the either the success or maybe some issue along the way made you go, oh gosh, yeah, no, that's the thing over over there? Is it, or how did you get to that?
Yeah, I mean, oh gosh, when you just sort of try and grab in your memory all the various examples, but I mean, I could just a couple of very random ones come to mind. I remember when I was working on baby clothes in Boots, and we wanted assistance to help young mothers with toddlers' clothes, etc., in store. And it was clear we couldn't afford to employ people for full-time roles. So we started exploring part-time roles. And the general view at the time was you can't take consultants on as part-time players. Until we started looking at what was the ideal person for the role. And no big surprise, an ideal person for the role was a young mum. And what did young mums need to do in the morning? They needed to typically, not always being generous, but they needed to drop off kids. And what do they need to do at the other end of the day? They need to be able to pick them up. So suddenly we created a role and hours that were perfect for young mums, who then just turned out to be perfect for our customers, who the only time they were shopping, no surprise, was after they'd also dropped kids off, etc. So it was just one of those sort of ridiculously obvious things. But in the culture of Boots at the time, you didn't take consultants on other than full-time or not at all. And by taking these part-time roles, we were able to get a caliber of consultants to work with young mums in the store, well in excess of the caliber you would normally expect for such a role, because you truly understood the needs of that group of people who wanted a sort of 4 hours, 6 hours, midday role 5 days a week, and not at weekends. So that would just be a little example that I remember. Kind of crumbs. This is so obvious, but if we hadn't got under the skin of understanding what the need was and what the workforce opportunity was, similarly. And another one springs to mind is I used to quite often interview some of the young people who started work at DFS, just randomly sort of say, why did you come? And a theme that started coming through was, they wanted to see that DFS was giving back to the community. And they wanted to see that there were job development, genuinely a commitment to developing you in the job to go forward. So the fact that we'd bothered to go through the whole process of getting best companies status, and that we made our charitable giving through huge number of things that we did for children in need, British Heart Foundation, recycling. That was often the two elements that tipped some of the young people wanting to come and join us. So it wasn't a hard benefit of salary roles and things. That they were looking, as that generation of young 20-year-olds coming in, for that being a differentiating feature. And so therefore exaggerating those aspects on our homepage for people to join the business, I think helped us get some better caliber young people into the business at the time.
And that's really interesting. We're certainly seeing trends towards, salary being less of a factor and people wanting, more from their workplace in those kind of softer areas. And I think, by having those conversations, of course, you find out. And if you don't have the conversations, you never find out. And so these things, you said about the that first example, which is brilliant, about the young mothers making very, very good people to talk to young mothers about clothes. And that seems absolutely obvious when you look back at it in hindsight. You think, oh, gosh, anyone could have thought of that.
Yep.
But actually, you can't, right? Like you only find those things if you go looking. And only if you try and understand things on a slightly deeper level. If you just look at a surface problem, oh, well, we don't hire people part-time. Oh, well, that conversation's out the window then. What are we going to do? Oh, we just won't have anyone. Oh, well, that was a solution. But actually, when you get beneath that sort of surface, that's the powerful thing. And so I wonder, is that in a sense what we're sort of driving at here? That one of the biggest problems is that we're not necessarily getting under the skin of the kind of human condition, no pun intended there, but, what it is that that gets people excited, because there's an analogy that I always bring here. I invite people to think of a job they hated on a day that they really just didn't want to be there, and think of how much work they did that day and how upbeat and how collaborative they were. And then think of a job that you loved on a day that you thought, oh God, I was good today. And think how much work you did that day and how upbeat and how collaborative you were. And that to me is the difference between a disengaged and engaged employee, and that's within one person. And actually, it can be within one job.
Yeah.
Often,
Yeah.
early stages can be very different to late stages. But if we start to question this, then we can try and push everyone towards that much better. You're much happier on the day that you loved your job, so it sort of benefits everyone. But unless you go searching for these things, you can't find them. I think that's
spot on. Spot.
Would you say that's the thread that I'm sort of picking up here? That you have to go and question those things, because if you just sort of march forward as though humans aren't human, then you don't achieve anything.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. You can never ask your customers, your colleagues, enough questions about trying to understand, what it is that's going to motivate them to go up a level, or in case of customers, stick with you another level. I remember one great example when I started at DFS. So I said, have you ever really, really talked as senior manager? Have you ever really talked to your customers? And of course they'd say yes, and they had a whole lot of prejudices. So I used to do this work at Boots, where we literally got a facilitator who was good at doing this kind of stuff, and she'd get us like 25 customers who'd bought sofas from DFS, and we brought them in the room and just got them to talk to the store where they bought it from, the manager there, then brought some people from the head office functions to talk to customers. And it was an absolute eye-opener, because all the things that the company's culture had said we were brilliant at wasn't necessary, or where we thought we stood versus competitors, etc. And you'd suddenly get 25 customers looking at, just going to go, no, that's not how we see it, And I remember some of my, senior guys, they'd been in the business 25, 30 years, and they were almost in denial afterwards, because they kind of go, well, they would say that, but what they really think is X. And I had to say, no, you've just heard 25 of them say something completely different. And, so even it doesn't matter whether it's reality. The point was, if that's how our customers perceive us, if that's how they believe that we've been with them, that is the truth. That's the reality. And that's what we've got to work on until we get a different response from them.
I think that's really powerful, and it shows the power, doesn't it, of asking those questions. I suppose probably for those people before they had that kind of eye-opening moment, this was probably scary, right? Because you might find out that the thing you thought wasn't right at all. And I think there's a sort of psychological fear that you can have in this area. If you ask people what they really think, you might find out that they don't think what you want them to think, and
that's exactly right.
And so again, I suppose that comes back to a culture in some ways of this. If you have this continuous improvement culture, as I said earlier, that necessitates that you have to admit that what you did before wasn't perfect, because otherwise you wouldn't be improving on it. And then you create a sort of knowledge cycle where you can accept that, okay, we didn't get that thing right, and now we're going to go and do it better.
Yeah.
Is that something that you sort of created within those teams?
Yeah, no. So massively important, and then of course trying to create the right answer and then testing it and seeing whether that's what the consumer wants is then part of the iterative cycle. Because just because you understand a problem doesn't mean the solutions you come up with are ones that they buy into. But just to give you a sense of how fundamental it can be in an organization, we were rightly very proud at DFS of having in-house two-man home delivery teams that would literally pick from the back of the store the sofas that had been made in a factory across the other side of the UK. They came in within a couple of days, we'd inform the customers, and hey presto, we'd come and deliver their sofas to their home. And the guys were good, they knew what they were doing, so everybody was super proud and thought we were the best in the business. until we then started asking customers a bit through the exercise I described, but then a much more thorough thing, and sort of said, well, turn it around the other way. When does it really work for you to deliver sofas to your house? And I think you can probably guess now what's coming up. But in the end, most of our customers wanted the sofas delivered early doors before they go to work, or when they've come back to work at the end of the day, or the weekends. You won't be surprised to know that those were the only hours we didn't deliver sofas on. So, yes, we had a really well-meaning, very capable operationally delivery team, but fundamentally they were asking customers to make some quite big compromises over their daily lives, maybe having to take days off. We couldn't even tell them whether we were going to turn up in the morning or the afternoon, etc., etc. So, cut a long story short, we then ended up being a 7-day-a-week delivery company, which meant that everybody in that whole, from picking the sofas in the warehouses to delivery, had to be on a 4 days on, 3 days off rota. And then we basically adapted our offer such that it coincided with when customers wanted delivery. And you won't be surprised to know that our net promoter score from customers around that leg of the journey with sofa buying went up pretty dramatically. And then we rewarded all the people in those functions for that improved consumer score, so they felt motivated to go that little extra mile to get it right around that.
So if I can try and sort of distill what we're saying here again into, ultimately it's about sort of getting feedback and being prepared to look under the hood and constantly improve what we've got. And this comes to customers, as you said, but actually we need to do the same thing for our own people in working out how we can get the right people in the right place and get the most out of them, because we're driving them and you must do more. It's about, hey, do you want to do this? And people go, yeah, I really do, because I'm bought into this. So let's move on to the second question, get a little bit more kind of aspirational, I suppose, and say, okay, if we fix this, if we manage to put things in place that can help in this, what can we expect? What should we be looking for? How will things be different in 5 years' time?
How will things be different in street? Now, we've got. Are you getting a little bit of interference? You might just want to do that quick, because I've just had somebody ring the doorbell, come in.
No, it's all good. You've got a sofa being delivered, haven't you?
Yeah. No,
let's crack. Yeah, crack on. Go ahead.
Yeah. So how are things going to be different? Well, look, I think you and I talked when we did meet a few weeks ago, and I think we talked about some of the other phenomena which link into what we've been talking about today, which is, we've just gone through an incredible experience with the pandemic. Suddenly, people have had to businesses have had to adapt to people working at home, and did so unbelievably well in many dimensions. But a Pandora's box was obviously opened. And the Pandora's box that was opened was many tasks to do with work don't need to be done physically in the office. Mm-hmm. And then you also then start to say, but if you swing the other way and nobody's in the office, how do you help bring people into a culture? How do new joins learn? How do you have those useful coffee machine conversation? So and then some businesses have reacted by going, right, everybody back to the office again. But the Pandora's box has been opened, and for some groups, going back to the point about different groups of people, for some groups they kind of go, being back in the office 5 days a week just doesn't work for me, because I've learned a new work-life balance, or I feel I'm less burnt out, I'm more efficient, or indeed, it's part of what I want. And if you're a company that won't let me work from home, I'll go and find one that does. And so, I think that in the next few years, as well as understand the sort of the digital dimension in terms of impact on our colleagues and our customers, I think that the workplace is going to need to be a lot more agile and nimble at recognizing the opportunities that the technology is brought into play, and that balance. And some of the things I talk about are, when you're in the office, you should be in the office together consciously rather than unconsciously. So one of the things I think, by department, by the type of work, by the kind of business, your kind of clients, there isn't a one size fits all. But I would still encourage people to recognize this is a tool in the box that can enable them to get at the broadest pool of talent in the UK. If you're as flexible as you can be for the task that is needed. And I think people are going to learn the right blend. But when they do bring people in the office, let's make it a conscious thing so that you do actually maximize the coffee machine conversations or the learning for the young person or the new join that's come into the business. So you just become much more conscious of the value of being together, but recognizing for some groups of employees, it could be a really important, necessarily point of difference over other competitor companies looking for talent in your field.
I think that's really, really interesting. One thing that I saw a lot during the pandemic, I'm sure a lot of people did, was various efforts to create, collaboration when it comes to being remote.
Yeah.
So, weekly coffees with other people sort of chosen randomly in the organisation,
Yeah.
et cetera. Very, very powerful methods that, bring those people together.
Yeah.
But actually, there's an interesting point that you just made there, which is most people have still got the office somewhere.
Yep.
And so rather than saying, oh, just come in when you fancy it, or,
Yep.
Come in X amount of days because we've said that, it's, why don't we just put all our meetings on a Wednesday?
Yeah,
and,
exactly right.
And then just come in and do that. And then we can go and have our water cooler moments, and we can go and, get involved with people, because the world is becoming by necessity more collaborative. Our solutions are created by multiple people generally, rather than just one. And so that's really important. And is this a trend that you're seeing, do you think, in businesses? Are they waking up to this?
I would suspect few are. I think people would recognise this conversation, but those that have gone the extra mile and started to do that, there will be some. I'm conscious, talking to my kids and the people that they work with, the idea of having sort of set times when people come in, so that there is a sense of the group being in. I think that's being embraced, and that structure. But I'd probably, as this conversation has highlighted, I'd probably challenge them a bit further and go, right, so we've got everybody in, but can we make it more of an event? Can we really try and think of outcomes that we're trying to create? And therefore, whether it's in a social angle, whether it's getting certain groups together, how do we really optimize that?
I think that's interesting. You've touched upon, obviously big sort of part of the continuous improvement within sport that you mentioned is this, what gets measured improves, and on the contrary, what doesn't get measured doesn't improve.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have the outcomes, if you don't know what you're trying to achieve, then you're, one, you don't know whether you're achieving it in the first place, and two, you're probably not.
Yeah.
I think that's really powerful. What sort of things would you sort of want to see, I suppose, as sort of measurable outcomes, if you've got any on your mind there? What should we be aiming for in these instances?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it needs to be super complicated. I think in the end, I talked about the fact we did 6 monthly colleague engagement surveys. Your questions should be related to, what makes us better in terms of how we look after customers and make money around it, which is what many people are in business for. So I think, just linking in those engagement surveys to the actions you're taking, get a sense of, are you getting feedback? Are the groups of people you hoped would be motivated by the activities we described, are their scores going in the right direction? It's back to if you're measuring. So I think those are the mechanisms that you can use to kind of see whether your actions are creating an outcome. There's one of the most frustrating things when you're in a big organisation is they often say, we don't communicate enough to us in the organisation. So then, you spend a year doing videos that you send out to the organisation, newsletters and stuff, and then a year later, you ask the same question again. They go, do you know what? You guys don't communicate enough, and you think, but for God's sake, I've done all this new stuff. And the truth is, you've done it, but you've just not created the linking with some of those different groups. And so, it's a painful journey, but, keep learning every 6 months with whether the actions you've taken have been registered. There's that lovely phrase, message intended versus message received. You should always be checking the message that's been received rather than being comforted by the fact that you had the right intent in the message you sent. And that's the same. You could say the same with action. Action intended, action received. What do people take? What have people actually done? Not has the work been done, but has the outcome been achieved?
I think that's really powerful. That's quite a method that people can go and hopefully take something away and make some change and for the better off the back of that. I'm really grateful to have you here with us today, Ian. It's been an absolute pleasure to dig into your wisdom. You shied away from that word earlier.
I did.
I'm going to put it on you now. It's absolutely fantastic to have your wisdom with us today, and really grateful for your time. Thank you.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed the conversation, Rez. All the best going forward.
Brilliant. Thank you. You too.
Cheers.
Cheers, Ian.
Bye.
Bye.